So I'm really curious to learn more about you. So this is kind of interactive, what I have planned with you. And especially, I wanted to hear feedback at the end and see how much this is relevant for you. So my name is Rouven Volk. I started working in the IT industry somewhere in 1998 with a vocational training. So this has been a long time. And here in 2008, I started really focusing on web development as a main focus and working for a digital agency, working with different technologies. Roughly at the same time, I started with this focus on Drupal as a solutions framework, but also as a CMS system. So something in between. Over the years, then I recognized that's pretty awesome technology, a lot of fun. And I always have been this person who was very passionate about technology. I want to understand things. I want to understand complex things. And at one point you realize, yep, you reach a certain level where you think like, okay, technology, like no matter if it's PHP, JavaScript or whatever, it's always the same pattern. But you start struggling communicating with the customer because the customer is not technical usually. So they approach you and tell you like, I need this and that. And you suddenly realize like, gosh, like I can talk with them, but it's so hard to explain stuff. So when I was asked to become solutions architect in 2015, I was really not sure if I would be ready for the task. I was used as being a senior developer and tech lead to speak with tech audience. Like today, I guess most of you are technical people here, right? So any solution architects here in the room? Please raise your hand. 2, yeah, nice. Developers, please raise your hand just to give me a feeling, most of it. Any other roles? Just shout out. What are you doing? Okay. Okay, yeah, I will repeat. So you're working in the front end field, not specifically a site builder. Yeah, so you're basically the users of the system. Yeah, site owners, building experience. Okay, let's work with that. Right. So you can see over the course of different years, I was working with many different brands, and most of them are using Drupal, interestingly. So some brands you might be familiar with. Of course, I did not do this everything on my own. I was working in companies and project teams, and so this gave me very interesting insights in how companies are thinking, how they make decisions. And I would like to share some light on that. I'm also a member of the Drupal Association. Some of you might have seen me as part of the program team of the DrupalCon, or with the Splash Awards. I'm the head of the jury there. And yeah, so like this is something I'm really passionate about and I love sharing. So let's get into it. You might wonder, what is a typical responsibility of a solutions architect? And there are 3 main fields we're working on. One is the typical pre-sales aspect. There are also a group of sales engineers which are very dedicated for this room. So the role in pre-sales is supporting a sales team, which is usually non-technical, with a technical knowledge, and also to support the customer making the decision, literally getting the technical win. The second part here you can see on the chart is the consultancy area. This is where we go out, conduct workshops, understand the customer, and help them to identify a way forward. It's not directly connected to sales. Usually, sales is the outcome of it, so they make decisions for projects. And this leads us to probably the most important part, requirements engineering. And I guess that most of you have touched with that, right? You work on issues, hopefully they are well prepared. And for me, also a very important thing is, if I did my job good as a requirements engineer, we have a well-filled backlog, good structure in the issues, so that the customer is convinced that we understood what he needs. At the same time, that the developers don't need to reach out to the customer again, because this is where we play basically our key strengths in standing between the customer and the team, but not in a way as a wall, but more as a friendly advisor for both sides. This becomes more obvious here on this slide. So Marvin, probably he's presenting me today, has an important job and responsibilities. And this is not only understanding the business requirements, but it's also about thinking about new solutions. And Drupal is definitely one strong technology, but for me as a solutions architect, it's just like one tool in my tools chain. It's something like the Swiss Army knife. very versatile, I can do a lot with it, but it's also not the best fit for all scenarios, if we have heard at this conference in some talks. Like there are always scenarios where Drupal comes to a limit and where we need to combine it with other technologies, especially in large-scale scenarios. So when I work with clients, there's always an important part about system integrations, because they consider the CMS not only as a standalone website. If they do, they probably don't need me. But those projects I focus in are always about system integrations. So they want to make sure that the user journey from the website is connected to their internal systems, like a CRM system, marketing tools, e-commerce, and a couple of others. For them, it's really important to have someone they can approach and tell them, like, this is what we need, but we are no tech experts, so could you please help us? When we think about that, especially when the customers are asking for help, and this is in most cases, like, they always seem to know what they want. They run RFPs, they invite you over and say, like, this is our project goal, let's define this. The reality usually is they are not very confident about that. And they need you as a trusted advisor. And building up this relationship is an essential part of it. And part of it is also to ask, like, the questions they don't really like. But you have to take care of it. Things like security and compliance, GDPR. How do you make it secure? I know, I understand the business vision, what you want to achieve, but how can we do this in a secure and scalable manner? So we also have to take into account things like platform architecture. And so you quickly recognize, okay, it's not only about the project itself, it's not limited to Drupal. It's about understanding everything surrounding that. And so when it comes to collaboration, we have two groups. One side, the client with stakeholders, product owners, you name it. They have all the creative idea, and most importantly, they have the budget. So every decision they make needs to be valid and justified, and not based on wishful thinking. They really need the facts, and they need to be able to make a business decision, because most of the times we're talking about a large number, and many people are attached to that. So it's a lot of responsibility connected to this decision process. On the other side, we also have the project team, usually combined of software developers, marketing, design, sales, project managers. And so we as SAs become like the person in the middle, the translators between like normal people, non-technical folks, and the people who want to do a brilliant job, but they need the right input. And usually they strongly rely on the center part so that we gather all the information we need to deliver projects in time and in budget. So you can imagine I always have to stay up to date. I go to conferences, I try to learn the latest technology trends, and really always one step ahead. So who recognized the 101010? Anyone speaking binary? No? Okay, if you figure it out later, just let me know. I'll leave it here as an Easter egg. But Marvin knows. So let's take a look into a typical customer journey. And there's so much stuff going on. And the companies usually are somewhere on part of this chart. And Gartner did a brilliant thing a few years ago because they combined design thinking, lean startup, and agile. So just raise your hands. Who feels comfortable in this sprint planning circle? Like, is this your home? As a developer? Yeah, only a few, okay. Who's more focused on this build, measure, learn circle, which is a bit more business, right? Less technical. Not too many, okay. Anyone feel comfortable in the first part? Like brainstorming, creating ideas, design thinking? It's interesting like how everything plays together, and this is just like a visual representation of it. But as a solutions architect, we basically need to feel comfortable in all those spaces, and usually we help our clients throughout this way. And this was a big change for me, because when I was a developer before, I usually spent time in the sprint circle, yeah, and then here and there I stepped into the other part and becoming more and more of a consultant over the time. So Jason Ryan from Brilliant Noise, one of the famous digital transformation companies, said, digital transformation is about people and not technology. And this was one of the hardest learnings for me as a tech person, because I always had this passion about technology. I want to understand it. And suddenly, I was standing in front of people, like today. And they wanted to change something, but they didn't know how. And I had to learn to read people, work with them, and figure out like what are the patterns and the things which make them work. So that's a pretty amazing journey. So I would like to use a second quote. And this one is something like my mantra. From Albert Einstein, probably you have heard it. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And this is really my goal, to make complex things easy to understand for anybody. So let's give it a try. I prepared this slide here, and I just put a very simple project in the center. And because this is a Drupal event, I just put Drupal as technology there. But you can combine it with any technology. And this is usually what the client is asking for. Like, we need a website. You have heard that before, correct? Okay, we need some integrations, maybe, yeah, some marketing stuff. Put it all in there. And this is why they invite you, because you're a specialist for Drupal. So you go there, you're well prepared, you know everything about your tool. You know that you can do it. And the customer thinks like, okay, yeah, sounds good. And then he interviews all the different other vendors coming in, and everybody is telling the same story. Our product is the best. We can do anything. You heard that before. So why is it important to take a different angle? Let's draw a circle around that. Because there's a client. And each client is individual. So if we want to know the role of the project in a company, and we really want to understand how it's working, we need to understand the client layer. So we need to ask the right questions to figure out what they really need and which role the technology is playing in their company and in their goal. So over the course of the next slides, and I roughly have 42 slides with content, I hit 10 rules. And this is the rule number 1. And those rules were really important for me to make a good job and like stay aligned and focused throughout the years, because it's never about me. It's not about my personality. It's always about the solution and the problem we have to solve. And this is why my first rule, it's the most important thing. First understand, then react. And it's so tempting when the customer is saying like, oh, I have a specific problem. And you know how you can do it. But you need to resist this urge. And you need to take a step back and think, is it really a good fit for the customer? Is Drupal really the solution? Or can we do it better? And sometimes, actually in the beginning, many times, I was faced with questions I didn't have the answer to. And this point is really important to say like, okay, I ask the right questions to understand your problem, and then I take my time, I go back in my office, do the research, and figure it out for the customer, because this is why they need me as a technical advisor. Because if they do the research, they are not sure if this is a good fit. So they hand this over to me. So take your time, first understand, then react. So for the customer, change is dangerous. Have you heard that before? It's cool, right? So customers are doing a big project, and a big project means always change. And so they're really afraid that this project will fail. Yeah, so you feel this anxiety. But at the same time, change is not only dangerous. Change is also the essence of life. If we don't change, we don't evolve. So we must go with the time, otherwise we go with the time. And so in this scenario, it's always important to emphasize okay, we need to create change in a secure way. Maybe in small steps. This is why agile software development is so popular, because we can work from one iteration to another. And the ugly truth is change is coming anyway. So if the customers don't change, they really face a problem. And this is why we are here. Which brings me to rule number 2. 10 is at the end. Make your time count. You will recognize that most of the slides I kept to a minimum, and this is for a specific reason. One of my early mentors in the days as a solutions architect always asked me, so what? Why do you show me this slide? Before I went out to a customer, he was checking my slide deck and saying, so what? What are you trying to tell me? So don't waste the time of your customer and make your time count. And this is a really important takeaway. No matter how much you're passionate about technology, no matter what you want to figure out, always think about you're an expensive resource. And as longer you take, as more the project has to wait on you. So really be focused, put the research where it's necessary, and make sure that every step counts. Because according to the chaos study, and this one was published in 2015, and I will come back to that, why 2015 is relevant, 71% of the projects didn't turn out as expected. So this is a very broad term. So what does it mean? When we break the number down, we can see that only 29% of projects were in scope. In scope means planned according to like the feature set, to the budget, and to the expected timeline. Only 29%. And this study is so relevant because they did this over years for IT projects. They conducted more than 15 years in this study. And so this pattern didn't really change over the years, but we adapted more lean methodology. So the number is hopefully getting better. But this was a situation I was facing back in 2015, starting as a solutions architect. So I wanted to figure out, like, why is that? What is the common problem? Like, what don't we see here? And so when we move forward, we can recognize that many people are in decision roles where they're responsible to make a buying decision without understanding the big picture. Not everyone did a university study or became a specialist. So I started to work on like a simple explanation and a framework which would help me to ask the right questions. And so I figured out one of the like patterns we can see here is everyone wants to be innovative, but what does it really mean? Yeah. So when I speak with customers, they have the really different understanding of innovation. What does it mean for their industry or for their specific case? But in the basics, it's about the ability to change, right? If you're not willing to change, you cannot innovate. You need to create room for it and the mindset. The second element here in this pyramid is know-how. You need to be able to foster know-how, to learn. Nowadays, it's quite easy. We have the internet, so you can Google, look things up. You can even ask ChatGPT to like bring you up to speed. And the last one is the ability to communicate. And when we take these three together, we can quickly recognize, when we see the evolution of humanity and technology, these three played a critical role with the ability to change, to communicate, and collect know-how, really bumped up the game. And now we are innovating so rapidly that no one can keep up with it anymore. And this is the situation we face with our challenges, with our customers. Like their challenge is they cannot keep up with it. So they depend on vendors like us. The next basic principle is digitalization. And you probably know this from your time where you went to university. And this is like really no secret. We're talking about standardization. So we need structured data, we need defined formats. Then we are able to automate them. Talking about Drupal, maybe we have structured data, we create a cron job, or we create workflows, we work with that. But it becomes really interesting when we talk about integration, and this is where Drupal plays a role in a big ecosystem for a company, because we want to connect with other systems. And this doesn't work if we miss one of those elements. So the standardization around digitalization is a key factor, and I always address this when I talk with the customers. Because most of the cases, they have a system which was not connected, not standardized, and now we need to think about how we can bring it together. Which brings me to the third element here in the pyramid scheme. And no, this is not a sales pyramid scheme. This is just like my framework to figure out like the questions I need to ask. What is value for the customer? For me, value is if technology helps me to save time, to be more efficient, to deliver better quality. But for a business, it's a different scale. So they always ask about like the cost, because they need to invest a budget, right? They spend money on it. The second one is they want to understand like what is the impact to my revenue? Does it help me to like make more money? Yeah. And the third one is the risk. Usually you would expect rolling out new technology should lower the risk. At the same time, you also venture into new chapters for the company. They try new technologies. So building a value proposition around these three key terms is essential to get the buy-in from the stakeholders. And these are non-technical people. But we're talking about people like the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, like the C-level people. They will always put a focus on that. So you have to take care of it. So when we get the big picture, we can see it fits together somehow. I thought like I'm missing a key part here. What is it? Any idea? What is the missing centerpiece? No? The client, close, like this is everything reflecting the client, yeah. Yeah. The architecture, yeah, or the architect itself, yeah, maybe. It's something else. And as a solutions architect, I always have to take myself out of the game. Like, I'm just moderating stuff. I just help people to understand and making decisions. I like make sure that the data and information is flowing in the right direction, but it's never about me. So it's all about certainty. And so this is my third rule. Your job is done when there's no uncertainty left. Because when I go to the client, I create uncertainty, and I will come back to that. So what we need to complete the picture is actually focus. And everyone is talking about that. This is the reason why most startups fail. They lack focus. And focus is required to make the right decision for technology selection. And Drupal might be a case of it. But also getting the right skills in your team, getting the right people together. Otherwise, it's very likely that your project will fail. And the third one is a methodology. I love the build, measure, learn circle. This is my favorite way of working. I also worked in Scrum teams. I used with Kanban boards. There are so many methodologies you could apply. Even waterfall. If it's a good fit, you need to figure this out. This is a key component to make your project successful. And so this is essentially it. And this was what I had to learn as a tech person, like a developer, to understand to be successful as a solutions architect. So I put this stuff together, and for me, it was like a very interesting journey to figure this out and to find a way to communicate this, because it is complex. There are so many aspects we have to take care of. So let me quote Mr. Spock, who will say at Stardate 5730.2, change is the essential process of all existence. And it's from a Star Trek movie. So some Trekkies here. Sorry, I'm a nerd. But this is the key. We need to be able to master change. And this is the complicated task. So please be aware of blind spots. And this is what I always find in most projects. Like, customers think they know what they want. They invite you over. And then I ask those questions. I check on all those different topics and figure out, oh, they have blind spots. And these blind spots are the cause of the 71% why projects fail. If you forget about one element, you put your business at risk. So what can we learn from it? You have seen a pattern here. And there's one lovely game. I'm not sure if Rubik's invented it, but they have this pyramid cube. You know the Rubik's Cube, maybe? This is a simplified version, but I love it. I have it at home. And so sometimes it feels like the customer has ideas about all the different things, different colors, but they're mixed up. So bringing structure to it is really nice. So in the end, it looks like that. But the way to go there is sometimes complicated, and we might face different shapes and structures. And this is how the work as a solution architect actually feels. So I really like this representation. And fun fact, it brings me to the next rule. Because to go from one side to another, I have the rule number 4. Always be proactive and prepared. This is so key. And like in the first day as a solutions architect, I still remember I was faced with a situation I was not prepared for. And my takeaway was always expect the unexpected. So do your research first before you go there. So talking about being prepared, just as a fun exercise, I thought having this on slides is nice, but I want such a cube or such a pyramid on my desk. So I just created a paper version for to print it out for myself. Feel free to scan the code and just fold it for yourself. Maybe it's helpful for you. It's just my little thing as a compass to keep focus throughout the project. And it helps me also in meetings because it helps me to remember, did I think about every aspect of the project? So I will also share the slides. So there's a PDF and you can have fun with it. So let's go into the next chapter. And I want to talk about practical tips. Right? So we understand what is solution architect doing. It's a little challenge coming from technical role, but I also think this technical background is really essential to being a successful solutions architect. You need to understand how people and technology works. And so when we think about practical tips, there are different topics I would like to address. Hopefully, some of these are like known patterns you have seen before. So hopefully, I don't tell you something brand new, but I hope to share a new perspective. And so I would like to start with a quote from Janne from XOF. And he said at the Drupal Business Days in Frankfurt, technology helps you to save money, and that is why you have to invest in it. Let this sink in for a moment. Think about your own buying decisions, what devices you buy, where you spend your time, why you use certain tools. This is so true in all aspects of life. Technology helps us to save money. Or we could also quote Steve Jobs, who said, like, a computer is like a bicycle to our brain. But I really like this because this is what the customer thinks. Like, they have to invest money, and so they want to invest it into the right technology. So greetings to Janne at this point. Always good working with you. What does it mean for the customer? And we can see a shift. In the past, we were always talking about capital expenditures and operational expenditures. So customers expected to spend like a big amount of budget to a main project, big bang relaunch, and after that, only 20% for the next 5 years as maintenance, operational cost, hosting, some security updates. But technology is not working anymore like that, especially not the internet. As we have learned with the innovation chart, technology is evolving faster than anyone could keep up with. So also companies recognize this and change to the other model, where they start with a really small MVP and then spend for the next 5 years the majority of the budget. So we're talking about OpEx. And this is really hard to sell because most companies, especially the large ones, are still having procurement requirements. We say like, yeah, we need a fixed price, fixed scope, and timeline. Which kills innovation. And so over the course of a project, and let's think about enterprise projects, so at a minimum, maybe 6 months, some take even longer. Over the course of implementing this stuff, we as solution architects like keep on guiding the customer, like a pathfinder, like we go along with them, like a guide when you try to climb a mountain. And we learn so much stuff along the way. Maybe you make a wrong step, you fall down a little bit, but you get up again and you continue because you want to reach the goal. Yeah, you want to come to the top of the mountain. So being like always present and like helping the customer to go this path is essential. And so the clients start slowly adapting this approach by planning the budget over a long time. If you want to know like how to sell this, feel free to follow up with me. But this would definitely like would consume more time than we have today. So rule number 6: no matter what you talk about, always speak the language of your customer. And this doesn't relate to German. By the way, I'm from Frankfurt, or English. You know? The language of the customer is always like your counterpart. You need to understand like what is their background, what's their expertise, and find the right words for it. And coincidentally, like I consider myself as a techie. I really love technology, and I always try to find analogies. One I frequently use is the airplane example. And the question I ask to my customers is, would you like to take a flight in a plane which is not continuously maintained? Like, anyone never took a flight? No, I wouldn't expect otherwise. So when you go onto a plane, you have the confidence that it's secure, it's well maintained. Like, they have so many checks, safety, so many procedures to keep it up in the air and to not crash. And it's one of the safest way of aviation nowadays. But why don't we consider our web projects like that? Especially as a company. If my website goes down, it's basically like an airplane crash for my customers. My reputation can be damaged, but I can also lose a lot of money. I need to replace this. There are so many risks attached to a website. And the customers always think like, oh, no. I just spent a couple of money here on this project. I bought it 5 or 10 years ago. It's still fine. It's a quality product. It's fine. But it's not. The web is evolving. And we are out there, like an airplane. And there are so many things. Like storms are coming, the wear down of this thing. If we don't maintain the application, if we don't keep it up to date, we put the business at risk. And this is an analogy most people can relate to. And this starts this change and think process in their mind. And this basically opens up to discussions like how open source can play a role for those companies. And where they understand like, oh, like open source, this means we can get like continuous input, continuous innovation into our product. It's not like it's now outdated for 10 years or 5 years, depending in which country you're living. But there's a way we learned in the open source community how we like collect all the different creations out there through processes and funnel it into a single product. And this is Drupal. Like there's so many contributors out there, and this is basically tapping the potential of innovation into an organization if they do it right. And this is where you as developers and service providers come in, because you need to implement these features we have in the Drupal community, things like update management, CI/CD, DevOps, you name it, right? If you excel at that, you can really help your customer to be successful and take the full potential of it. And this is such an interesting conversation you can have with those organizations because they're not used to. Usually they buy a big software license. If it's not good enough, they just look for the next bigger service provider. Sometimes they end up with big brands like Adobe or SAP, Microsoft, and they are so deep into a big license package that they don't see the option anymore how to innovate and how to like go and innovate with the time. Usually, this is a part where I conduct a workshop with them to really understand like how it would work and what would it may mean as a change for an organization. But I keep it simple here at this point. As I said, feel free to follow up with me. One thing which also made me really excited this morning was seeing the SDGs, like the Sustainability Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals of the UN in the keynote. Because this is something which also inspired me many years ago. And there are many goals here on this chart the UN defined for us or agreed on with all the different members, how we want to improve the world, how we make the world a better place. And it's like, it might not be obvious, but when we take a look into specific chapters like 8, decent working economic growth, we all want that, right? We can make sure that with our approach, how we do the project, can actually achieve this. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Have you heard about the term like cloud computing, Kubernetes, virtual environments? Yeah, everything around that like perfectly fits into this chapter. Also, reduce inequalities, making sure you have a fair working environment, be inclusive. Like these are values of the Drupal community anyway. So why don't we share this with our clients? There are many more. You could find stories too and include in your value proposition. If you want to pitch your idea, just tap into that because the customer can go there in the end, take it and say like, hey, we just spent a certain amount of money and time, and now we are in alignment with the UN sustainability goals. How awesome is that? Not talking about greenwashing. And this brings me to the next rule, rule number 7. Always use fact-based decision-making and no wishful thinking. Because we have so many crazy ideas, so many awesome things we can do. You probably all return home from this conference. You got so much inspiration. You think like, wow, like I wanted to put hands on that. I wanted to try it. But as a solutions architect, you're always responsible for helping the customer making the decision. And so you have to rely on fact-based decision-making and not your personal opinion. So let's bring this together. And this is a tool I love using in any workshop. And this is why I love being on site. It's hard to do this virtually. So let's imagine the customer invites you over. They have a project idea, as I mentioned earlier. You remember the circle, right? And they know what they want. So I go to the whiteboard and say like, look, this is my uncertainty chart. And I would like to understand before we go into detail, like how certain are you that you know what you want and how to get there? What do you think? Like, what is the customer typically answering? No, not sure. Again? Where the chart is, yeah. Good point, yeah. So I usually say like, okay, here's 0, there's 100, yeah. So how far should we go? And I can tell you most customers are very confident, so it's always around somewhere 90%. And that's something I can work with. This really makes me excited because you remember the slide. They thought about what is in the inner circle. They know what they want from the CMS, what is like, I need rich text editing, dynamic layouts, oh, we need better SEO. It's all in the inner cycle. And so like, okay, fine, we can do that. Like, tick, 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 we have modules for that. You have heard that before. But then I apply my framework and I try to figure out where are the blind spots, the things the customer has not thought about. And over the course of such meetings, you can recognize, like, when we go through the different topics, that the customer is not that certain anymore. I create uncertainty, and maybe it's not very fair. Yeah, but I also think it's important to address those things because I want to make sure that the project is set up for success. And so over the course of this meeting, the chart is slowly declining. And at one point, we might figure out that there's so much uncertainty now in the room that they think like, oh my God, we have so many different vendors here, and they're all just talking about how awesome their project is or their product, what they can do. But this guy now is taking an approach and helps me to understand what I, as a customer, as a client, as an organization, need. So when this chart basically goes below 50% is usually the part where I say, okay, like, I think you have the right idea, but we need to put some more thought into it. Let's do a discovery workshop together. Let's figure this out. Let's make sure you don't have any blind spots left. And this is where the journey starts. And this is really a good foundation to build up this trusted advisory relationship with your clients. And this brings us to rule number 8. Always be honest, because people rely on you. And it's not only the buying decision of the customer, it's also the whole team, the whole project team. You need to get the technical win, as you remember, as one task of this as a role. But then once you win this project, you also need to make sure that your team is set up for success on both sides. And my team is not only the development team or like the creative people delivering it on the service provider side, it's also the customer side. The product owner needs to understand his role. And the only way to address this is like plain honesty. Just name it. Like, don't be polite. Of course, like, be professional, right? But you don't have to be polite. Be direct. Help them to understand their role and their responsibility in the whole setup. And so this is also, even though it's rule number 8 and quite at the end of my talk, it's still an important thing to take care of. So you might wonder, what would be useful soft skills to become a solutions architect? Is this maybe a career path for me? Is this something I would like to do? And there are plenty of things, but like, these were the things which definitely were useful for me. As I mentioned earlier, like, I'm really passionate about understanding complex things. And technology can be complex, but humans as well. So I think this is a perfect fit. We should definitely avoid bias. Yeah. So you can be optimistic or pessimistic. It's not important. Like, this is your personality. But you should always be a realist. Yeah? I'm an optimistic realist. So this is why I have this talk here and just say like, hey, maybe I can inspire some people for this awesome career path. I really like it. And this was one of my best decisions back in 2015. You have to take ownership. You really need to go out there and take ownership. And this is what you get paid for. And I just recently had this with a customer. They said like, yeah, like, we believe you have the skills, but we don't want to own it. We actually are willing to pay you more if you could lead us through the process, if you take ownership of the process. And this is a big service opportunity for all professional vendors here in this field. Customers are asking for that. And it's not only about like the time you spend on your estimation charts for the project, but it's also the additional value you create. And this is the second part of the initial chart with the consultancy. Yeah, you can really add value for them. You should enjoy mentorship. Over the years, I become a mentor by myself. I use the open source community to step up the game, take like not only ownership, but also becoming a mentor to many people. So if anyone would like to catch up afterwards, feel free to approach me. I'm always open for that. And I also had very strong mentors along the way, and this was so important. So to cut it short, show empathy. I think it's essential. Love, the presenting skills. And I was an introvert back in the days, and now I stand here and I really enjoy speaking to you and seeing your faces. And you can only see me, but I can see all the different impressions and expressions. So enjoy this. Leave your comfort zone. And don't lose your track with technology. I still do rapid prototyping, and like, staying connected and hands-on experience are so essential, because if the customer has an idea, you just go back home, you hack it in, next day you show like, look, I think we can do that. And this is really convincing. So you need this tech background. Which brings me to rule number 9, and this is quality. Quality is when the customer and not the product is coming back. I just let sink this in. I want to close this talk not only with rule number 10, but also with reference. One reference which inspired me like crazy. I was born in the year 1983. So this was before I was born. Does anybody know where this picture was taken? It was not the movie. Actually, this is Gene Kranz at the operation center of the NASA, and is part of the Apollo program. And I don't know about you, but like we saw 3 men flying to the moon. 2 were landing, and 1 made an important step. But behind that project, at its peak time, there were more than 400,000 people employed in the Apollo program. 400,000 people. And do you see the parallel with open source and what we do as a spearhead with the clients? There's only one guy talking, but then we are nothing without the team. And so sometimes it's really tough to be competent, and I really like this understanding and this approach. So let me close the session with my last and final rule, number 10. It is, you can do absolutely anything. And if you don't know this one, it's not my quote, it is from The Expert. And The Expert was a movie launched 9 years ago about a tech guy in a meeting faced with an impossible task. If you don't know this movie, check it out. I added QR code so you can quickly look it up on YouTube. It is brilliant, and it is exactly describing the job we as tech people in front of customers have. No matter if you're a senior dev, being responsible for requirements engineering, or starting to do this consultancy stuff, or getting into pre-sales. It's really not important. Like this movie, like puts it into a nutshell. It's really awesome. I really enjoyed it. I think I watched it every 2 years. So long, and thanks for all the fish. So we are opening up the Q&A. So I think we're a bit short in time, but yeah, you just let us know. So who has the first question? Oh, the printout. Yeah, sure. I will also publish the slides afterwards. Let's see. Hello? Yeah. Here, this one.
Hi. I have a sort of practical question for my day-to-day. Like, there's sort of a lot of secrets in my role. Like, in terms of what the client knows, what their decision process is, why they want a certain requirement, for example. So how do you sort of like help with that, right? You are never allowed to know why, let's say that. Like, how do you make your role still as valuable as possible along the way?
I have to admit there's a certain art to it, and sometimes we have to work with assumptions because the customer is not allowed to tell us the details. Typical scenario, you participate in a request for proposals. Yeah, there are certain rules and you have to stick to it. So you can probably ask like about the requirements, but not about the budget, right? So it's a typical challenge. So like, how far can we go? Usually the customer has a very strong interest in finding the best solution provider. So they're very willing to give you information if you ask the right questions. Sometimes they're not allowed to, but you can read between the lines. Do you have a specific example you would like to address?
Let's say regulatory reasons. Like, let's say there are laws in place, and and your company does not, your client doesn't tell you why they are making certain decisions because they want to be compliant or not compliant with a particular law.
This is usually something you can easily look up. So clients which are under the umbrella of any compliance regulation are usually a public company. So they have an annual report, so we can figure out like what their strategic goals are and where they put the focus, especially if they want to be compliant with something. So this is always a good source. You can look this up in the internet on the relevant resources in your country. I know we have this as public information in Germany, at least. The second point is the regulatory is usually specifying the scope, which clients are under it. So if a big pharma company is coming to me, I know exactly like, oh yeah, pharma, they need to implement stuff like medical legal review. Now was a big thing with Bayer and other pharma companies. So by understanding the client, and this is the outer ring of the chart I was drawing, you just need to do the research, be proactive and prepared. But feel free to like catch up with me and we can go into detail later. Next question.
Thank you, Rouven. Good presentation, nice slides. I really like the quotes. My question is, what would you say on average, how much time of such an engagement would you spend on the discovery phase, the discovery workshops, working with the clients, and actually then, you know, defining the solution and helping the teams to implement? If there was like a percentual split or something, like how would you see that?
It totally depends on what the client wants to achieve, and I would like to bring up this chart again. So sometimes you're only invited to the pre-sales phase and help to get the technical win. For me, this is too limited. I'm not just a pre-sales engineer. I'm not motivated by just getting a sales commission and then done, handing it over to the team. But I see this many times with especially large service providers. The pre-sales phase with discovery workshops, RFPs, and so on, usually, I would say somewhere between, like on a quick deal, 5% of the project volume, up to 20 if you really need to conduct big discovery.
Well, I meant more like from your engagement, if you think of what you do with a client in a project, like how much of this effort that you bring in would be like in the pre-sales phase, requirement engineering phase, or then maybe working with a team?
Yeah, I would say on average 10 to 20% is like responsibility of the SA, like guiding the customer through the process and preparing the stuff so that the dev team can really focus on implementing it. Does it answer your question?
No, I think I'm not asking really well. So I said of your time, you know, if you spend 100 hours in a project, like how much time is like the discovery workshop with a client, and how much of that 100 hours would be working with a team that implements? Oh, I like a feeling for, I think it's interesting to like, you know, have a feeling for like how large is the aspect of the consulting with the client in relationship to a solution definition and working with the teams. So,
like my rule of thumb is like 1/5. So take your hand, like the first part is the consultancy and SDD, like solution definition document, to define everything, and then supporting the team throughout the process. So usually the time you spend in the first like specification phase is 1/5 of the overall project timeline. But yeah, like it always depends on the customer and use case. Do we have time for one final question, or?
Sorry, I think we're out of time.
All right, but thank you. You have been a great audience. Enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.